Today's episode is brought to you by Positively Productive Systems, whose mission is to be the antidote to your stress and to provide compassionate productivity resources and coaching that help you heal and achieve. Be sure to check out both free and paid resources at positivelyproductive.com/resources.
There is so much externally that's telling us that we have to do more, achieve more, get more done in a day. And that, in my mind, is really a recipe for burnout. And there's a limited amount of control that we have about the messages that are bombarding us all the time. But what we do have control over is what's going on inside. So how much are we listening to what's coming in? And also, do we already have parts of us that are giving us these messages that we're not enough? Have we, internalized some of those messages?
You're listening to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zaratny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a productivity coach certified in positive psychology and stress management. Join me as we explore ways to live a more proactive, positive life with episodes on productivity, self-awareness, mindset, entrepreneur life, habits and systems, simplicity, fun, and more. I understand overwhelm personally as a multi-passionate entrepreneur, wife and mom to kids and cats, and as a caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. Welcome to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa, and today we're exploring another tool for our personalized productivity toolbox. It's called Internal Family Systems, or IFS, and it's an evidence-based approach that can help with the prevention and treatment of burnout, as well as other chronic conditions frequently resulting from continued stress responses. My guest, LaCelle, joins me today to help us understand IFS and to explain how this trauma-informed therapy model can help you get present, regulate your nervous system, and even rewire your brain. Katie is a somatic IFS practitioner who's passionate about helping people uncover their own internal wise leaders and reconnect with their deepest embodied intuition. What I appreciated most in our conversation was how IFS promotes self-compassion, self-trust, and self-awareness, things we talk about frequently here. As a bonus, there's much you can access online on YouTube, for example, to learn how to approach IFS yourself. Katie gets us started, and you can take it from there. She mentions a book called No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz, who is the creator of the Internal Family Systems. You can find this book and any others mentioned on the podcast on my favorites page at positivelyproductive.com/favorites. Today's episode is a continuation of some critical conversations we've begun on the podcast, including episodes with Mallory Jackson on living a trauma-informed life and on codependence. I encourage you also to listen to my solo episode on stress and my interview with Krista Bevan on how your body responds to stress. You may also appreciate my conversation with Kristen Kubik about processing emotions and trusting your intuition. They all connect so well to this conversation today. I'll link those in the show notes for you. Every November, I focus my content on healing because I think this time of year especially, we need it so very much. I wish you peace and healing, and I will continue to find ways to help promote that for you. Now, let's join Katie to learn about IFS and how it can help us deal with burnout. Welcome to the Positively Living Podcast, Katie LaCelle. I am really looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too. I can't believe it's been months since we first connected. It's so much anticipation.
I know these things take time, but I tell you, it's going to be worth the wait. Before we dig into this really important topic, because anything that can help us in the prevention of burnout, it's something I want to bring up. But before we do that, would you please tell us a bit about who you are, who you help, and my favorite part of this question is, what makes you light up?
Yeah, so I like to joke that I am a recovering corporate executive. So I have a lot of personal experience with burnout. What I do now is I am a somatic IFS practitioner. So I use a evidence-based therapy model called internal family systems to help other folks to recover from burnout, avoid burnout, and really learn all the deep truths about their systems. I do also do leadership coaching, ties in really well. As we'll kind of get to, part of what IFS teaches us is that we all have a wise internal leader, and it's a question of really getting in touch with that it was always there all along. So those two things do actually tie together. And my background is in engineering, which has nothing to do with what I do now, but IFS is a systems theory and family therapy combined model, so everything does eventually seem to come back around somehow. And my master's degree is in leadership, so that kind of ties it all together for me. And what really lights me up, to be quite honest with you, is seeing other people light up.
I love that. Yeah, I feel the same way too. Whenever we can elevate others, and I'm going to, go ahead and put words in your mouth and say, I bet that it really lights you up when you can help people make discoveries that can truly help them heal.
Yes, 100%. Getting to witness as people get to know their systems and really start to feel that they have everything inside them already that they need to heal. Honestly, it's an incredible gift to get to be a part of that all the time.
And I think as we're having this conversation, as you're listening in, it's like, we know why we need this, right? But let's be absolutely clear and start from the very beginning. Why? Why? What's going on? And what have you seen too? That would be great to know in terms of burnout and the pressures that we're experiencing and what the repercussions of that experience are and why we want to find ways to prevent it, to come back from it.
I think there is so much externally that's telling us that we have to do more, achieve more, get more done in a day. And that, in my mind, is really a recipe for burnout. And there's a limited amount of control that we have about the messages that are bombarding us all the time. But what we do have control over is what's going on inside. So, how much are we listening to what's coming in? And also, do we already have parts of us that are giving us these messages that we're not enough? Have we, internalized some of those messages? For example, IFS teaches us that we all have parts, and these parts are natural and normal, and we're born with them. And as we go throughout our lives, these parts, they pick up burdens or jobs or roles in our system, and they do these to help us stay safe. And the unfortunate thing is that often they pick them up when we're quite young, and we don't have as many options, but we keep doing those things, even when we have more options. The really common part that a lot of people have, or a burden that a lot of people have, is the burden of achievement. And when that is balanced, you can do it in a very healthy way, right? You come from a place of enthusiasm and excitement. But when it is a burden, it might be coming from a place of survival energy. So I'm not safe unless I get this master's degree, or, I'm not good enough unless I'm able to get everything done on my list every day. So IFS really helps us to get to know what's in our system and what is coming from a place of kind of enthusiasm, excitement, openness, and what's coming from a place of fear and survival, and really getting to know those parts, developing trust with them, and help them, find a new role and a new way of being in our system.
When you talk about survival energy, I feel that so deeply, having lived in survival mode and knowing what that feels like. And the idea that we have to achieve or we have to do in order to. And that could be, as you said, to feel safe. And it's interesting to think about it like that because it's not necessarily a language that we would use every day. I feel safe. I lock the doors and, I'm like, no, no, no. It's like in you or as you're walking through life, do you feel like you can breathe, like you can take a break, and most importantly, do you feel that you are worthy? And so to bring up a really important guest who shared the basis of trauma with us, Mallory Jackson was on the show and talked about living a trauma-informed life. She talked about codependency as well. And this idea, and I always love how she put it. She was like, you show up worthy. But you're right. We may show up that way, but we are constantly given messages from our families, from society. There's so many things culturally, you name it, that give us messages. And then I guess what you're saying is that we respond in a way that's a coping mechanism. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying, that we pick up these burdens in order to, and when I say stay safe, that might mean stay accepted.
Yeah.
Especially when you're young, you are stuck with, for better and for worse, right, the family that you have most of the time. So things can feel much more high stakes when you're young, and you have a different capabilities within your brain because it's still coming online. So, even if it's not quote unquote objective reality that you are in danger, danger might feel different, right? And the things that we do to staying attached to your caregivers when you're young is survival.
Oh, absolutely. And the idea that there has to be logic involved with how we're feeling, that's debunked, right? Because our brains are constantly trying to protect us from different things where you're like, that's actually not a threat, just so we're clear. And your brain's like, yeah, I don't know. I'm not so sure. But, I joke about this in part because that's what I do, but it helps to remind us that yeah, there's not necessarily going to be a logic to it. It's going to be a deep-seated belief that's going to attribute to, or inform so much of what you've done and the action that you've taken. What I find so interesting about this is the term, and it's so telling that you call it a burden.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that language is really important because we may do things and we've come to accept them, right? Because it's tradition, because we're used to it, because it's familiar. Even the most familiar thing that is problematic for us, we will accept because it's familiar. So making those shifts can be very difficult. And that's why one of the messages here, one of the messages I'm constantly promoting is this self-awareness and self-discovery and everything that you're talking about. So one of the modalities that we can use for this self-discovery is what you are a practitioner in IFS. Let's dig in a little bit to what that's about, and we can figure out what to take away from that today to explore more for ourselves.
Yeah. As I mentioned, IFS teaches us that we all have parts and we're born with them, and that's natural and that's normal. And as we go through our lives, these parts may pick up these burdens we've been talking about. And I mentioned, one already, the burden of achievement. There's the burden of perfectionism, the burden of caretaking, burden of knowledge seeking. So all of these different, basically, strategies that make us feel more safe. And most of the burdens that I just mentioned are usually picked up by what are called manager parts. There are 3 different kinds of parts. The protective managers are trying to prevent something bad from happening, so they're proactive. So you might have a project planning manager who is trying to keep you from, being stressed out by making sure that you've got all your ducks in a row. There's another type of protective part that's called a firefighter. This is a reactive protection part. So let's say that, you are called into your boss's office and you get feedback, and that feedback feels really bad or really scary to your system, and you leave and then you immediately call your best friend and you trash your boss. That might be a firefighting part. That something has already happened and that part is saying, oh, it's not safe to feel bad and to feel maybe shame, like I feel like I did something bad. So I'm going to use this firefighting part to kind of rant and make the boss the problem instead. And what these protective parts exist to do is to either protect or keep from coming to the surface, these vulnerable parts of us, these wounded parts of us called exiles, which hold beliefs that are too scary to our system to feel. And a lot of times that has to do with shame. So, for example, a perfectionist part might be really working to cover up an exile that holds a belief of, I am fundamentally defective. An achiever might be working to cover up an exile that holds a belief that says, I am not worthy as I am, just by being. Genuinely feeling these things, I mean, we've all felt shame and we've all felt how bad that feels. So these parts will do lots of different things in order to keep those beliefs from kind of coming into the foreground of your awareness, to keep these exiles from being activated. Depending on what's happened to you, their strategies could be more and more extreme. So in IFS terminology, they talk about addictions in terms of being firefighting parts who are holding an addiction burden because whatever you are escaping is scarier than the addiction is.
Yeah, and that ties back to this idea, or at least I don't know if it's directly connected to it, but it makes me think of when we talk about creating change in our lives, especially if we're trying to do something that serves us better, right? And I like to use that as opposed to saying we have good habits and bad habits, or I don't really like using those terms. But we know that there are things that we do that serve us better than others. And when we're trying to elicit change, right? And we're trying to grow and change in a way that will serve us better, it can be challenging. But oftentimes that motivational push or like that turning point for us, I think the way it's described is when the pain of staying as you are is greater than the pain or the challenge, right, that you would need in order to make the change.
Well, I think what I'm hearing you affirm is that we are motivated by trying to seek an area of less pain.
Oh, yeah. That I think is very much the case. I think that's what our brains are constantly doing to be like, is that a threat? Is that difficult? I often joke because I can see it happening. I see it in myself. I see it in my clients where our brains are like, oh, man, that sounds like it's going to be really difficult. We don't want to do that, do we? No. And then avoidance, right? So we don't want to purposely walk into something that's challenging or painful. That makes so much sense. So now we have parts of us that are like, all right, what do we need to do in order to not have that happen?
And the answer, as much as there is ever one answer, right? But the direction in IFS is encouraging those parts to soften back, to unblend with you, so that your self can come through. Wise internal leader that I mentioned earlier on. And that type of energy is associated with, there's 8 C's. It's compassion, clarity, creativity, curiosity, courage, confidence, calm. I think I actually got all 8 off the top of my head. It's hard to do.
Nice.
So when you're starting to feel that, when you're really feeling, oh, my heart is really open, you know that your parts have softened back. And that's the space from which you can start to get to know your different parts, understand if they're protectors, understand what their concerns are, maybe understand where they got their job, witness them, be with them. And with that trust, over time, they will hopefully allow you to access an exiled part. And that is where some of the deeper healing can sometimes be done, because oftentimes that part is stuck in the past. There's actually some really interesting neuroscience behind that. So I'm in a traumatic stress certification program right now. And one of the very first things they teach in Foundations of Trauma is that it affects your brain's ability to know what time you're in and to correctly kind of store memory. In brain scans, there's an area of your brain, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which has been kind of deemed the brain's timekeeper. Certain triggers and certain memories can actually really take you out of the present time. And these exiles think that it's still the past. So they think that you might still be, 6 or 5 or 2 or whatever age that particular traumatic injury happened. So with the trust of those protectors, you can go to those exiled parts and you can give them what they need in order to come into the present or come into a safe place. Sometimes that's just witnessing. It's here's what's happened. Sometimes they want you to kind of do a redo with them. So come into the memory and, for example, tell somebody who was abusive, this isn't okay, like you need to back off. Sometimes they just don't want to be there anymore. So different parts might need different things. But when you do that, it's called an exile unburdening process when they are witnessed and they're able to let go of whatever belief they took in, like that I am fundamentally bad or no one loves me or I'm alone. They become an unburdened exile, and that just opens up so much space in your system. Those protectors, whether it was one or more, no longer have to work so hard to keep that exile down because that exile is no longer trapped.
It's funny because when I was talking with Mallory about trauma, we had such a similar moment where I was like, wow, this feels like really deep. And so what I want to encourage is the fact that as we address this, as we have this conversation about these things, there's so much encouragement to say that, for starters, to me, it immediately tells me that the more that we focus on healing, the better everything else will be. Because, for example, when you are trying to be ultra productive, that is a trauma response many times. And it sounds like it's tapping into the different kinds of potential exiles that you're talking about of maybe, the not feeling worthy or, not feeling enough or, whatever it is that they're trying to hide from. And then the protectors, is that correct, would be trying to step in and be like, well, if I do enough, it's sort of the if-then statements. If I do enough of this, then I'll be accepted or loved or praised or worthy or whatever it is. So all this to say, and it's something I've been talking about for quite some time, is that we need to not be doing the Band-Aids. We need to be curing the actual underlying problems. Now, there's a lot to it. So you have practitioners such as yourself. Also, I do see the overlap in what you're talking about in terms of a lot of different kinds of therapies. Can we step back from this? So now we know what's going on with IFS, and we also know that, there's so much going on for all of us in terms of the pressures that we're under to do more. What could be a good first step that we can do? What are the things that we can do on our own? Like, we've listened to you today, Katie. We're inspired, but it's like, I don't know that I'm going to be calling a practitioner tomorrow. I want to learn more. I want to do some things on my own. What could that be?
So the more curiosity that you can bring to your system. So for example, let's say that you have a reaction that in hindsight you really don't like. Can you bring some non-judgmental, compassionate curiosity to that and think, if this made sense, if this response in context, in my context, if it made sense and it was me trying to protect myself in some way, what might that mean? Another quote I really love from that trauma program I was talking about is, all adaptations make complete sense within the context they were developed. So any reaction you have, now that I'm not saying that to excuse harm or say we shouldn't do our best to not be mean to people, but for the purposes of your own healing, really just assuming best intentions for self-protection. Why did I react that way? What did it trigger in me that made me have this response that in hindsight I don't like? And the more you can turn to things in that curious way, the more that your parts will start feeling that energy and the more that you'll be able to learn, because we don't learn from a place of shaming. We don't learn from a place of judgment.
I love that. And I've been a firm believer for a long time and I've mentioned curiosity. So you could see me. It was a visual. Katie could see me going, yes, as soon as she mentioned curiosity. I've brought up this word so many times. And I actually believe that inherently, by its very nature, it helps us let go of some of that judgment. Because being curious and saying, why did that happen? Being like a scientist, right? And saying, all right, let's see, what was the cause and effect going on here? What was happening? What are the details, And when you do that and you're focusing on those elements, it's less about, oh, that was awful. I feel ashamed I did that, or that's just, I'm the worst, or whatever it is that you tend to feel, or just the frustration of, oh, this is happening again. Actually, it even brings you away from making connections where it sounds like that firefighter thing, where then you're like, oh, well, it's, you don't want to blame yourself because you're probably already frustrated. So you're looking to blame somebody else. I'm not saying don't rant with your bestie. Liz, this is a shout out to you because I've ranted to you plenty. That's part of just living life and getting through things. But what I love the most is go ahead and rant and then get curious and say, okay, so what went down there? Why was that such a trigger for me, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it starts with noticing. All change starts with noticing. You have to know where you are and have maybe a sense of why you are where you are before you can go anywhere else.
Yeah, that is so good. So again, curiosity, one of the questions that you asked, and I wrote that down because it's such a simple one and it's one we can take away, is when you have a reaction, and especially I guess it would be a reaction maybe that you're like, oh, that was kind of extreme, or that was not really acceptable by me, or whatever it happens to be. It's something that you're not particularly liking. You say, why did I react that way?
Yeah. If there was a part of me that had really good intentions for me, because one of the most important things about IFS is there are no bad parts.
Right.
There might be bad behavior, right? Or behavior we don't want, but all parts are doing what they're doing because they have positive intentions. So if there was a part of me that had stepped in and tried to do something for me, what are they trying to do? What is that positive intention? What might that be? And just another thing to mention about IFS, one other thing I really love about it is there's not a lot of gatekeeping about being able to explore your own system without a therapist or a practitioner. So the book that I was going to maybe mention a bit later, but I'll mention it now, No Bad Parts by Dr. Richard Schwartz. So that's the founder of IFS. And it's a very practical book that you can pick up, and he gives meditations and exercises. There are free meditations videos on YouTube. There's a lot out there for exploring that you don't have to pay somebody to do. I'm not going to say that you're going to be able to get to everything on your own. I'll say that in my system, I've done a lot of work by myself, and then there's been work that I've needed another human to hold space to do. But there is quite a lot out there that you can do without having to invest, in working with a therapist or a practitioner.
I love that. Thank you. Yes. And the book will definitely be on the favorites page of my website, so we can access that quickly. And yeah, YouTube. Oh my gosh, what haven't I learned on YouTube at this point, really? But to that point, I think, as in anything else, self-awareness can get us to a point. Everybody is going to have a different point it can get us to. The same thing with coaching, right? There are many people, most of the clients I work with, and this is probably not an expected thing necessarily, and so I like to bring it up a lot, have tried so many different kinds of productivity techniques and have learned so much about themselves. They have explored quite a bit, tried quite a bit, achieved quite a bit. And then there's some kind of block. And it's interesting because I can see some examples of the things that you're talking about in my clients. And this idea, like some of the key words that you brought up, those 8 C's that you got off the top of your head, well done. Compassion. That one just jumped right out at me. And I do believe everything that we do here needs to be done with compassion. But yeah, we can explore to begin with, and we can make progress to begin with, and then maybe have help depending upon what you feel held back by, how much progress you feel that you're making. Everyone's situation is going to be different, but I love that there are places that we can start. That's what my hope is always, that we talk about something, we understand why it's important, and then we figure out what we can do. And I think you have laid that out beautifully. Any other thoughts before we go into our fun rapid wrap-up?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to reiterate again that the IFS modality really teaches that you have what you need inside of you. What you might need help with is holding space for those parts of you to unblend so you can really feel that you have that knowledge and that you have that compassion and that curiosity already inside of you. But it all comes from you. It's all about uncovering your answers and your wise leadership.
That is such an encouraging way for us to wrap up. And before we go into some of our more fun questions, tell us where we can find you online, Katie.
So I am on Instagram at Chrisana LLC, which I believe will be in the show notes. And I have a website by the same name, so chrisanallc.com.
Absolutely. We'll definitely have that in the show notes. Okay, are you ready for this rapid wrap-up?
I am ready.
Good. All right. Fill in the blanks for me, please. A song that lifts my spirits, makes me dance, is?
Footloose by Kenny Loggins.
That literally has to make you dance.
Right? I think it's a law.
I think so, actually, yeah. I wouldn't mess with that. I would definitely dance. Okay, how about a quote or a mantra that inspires me, that maybe I share a lot?
What's in the way is the way.
Oh, that's good. That feels like a Confucius moment. Oh my God. I just watched Kung Fu Panda, and that just, that feels like a Master Shifu kind of thing. Oh my gosh. Okay. What's in the way is the way. Okay. Now, how about a resource? Could be a book or an app. You've mentioned one already. So if you have anything else that you want to share, it doesn't even have to do with today's topic necessarily, but just something that you want to share that's made your life better.
Oh my gosh. One of my parts feels this is an embarrassing answer, but
Do it.
I really like the Google Sheets app. I really like spreadsheets.
Well, there you go. And you know, what's funny about these answers is that we get so many different ones, and they can inspire someone to be like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. I really should get better at spreadsheets. Or, you know, or just the fact that like one of these days Google needs to sponsor me, because I'm constantly being like Google Calendar, Google Sheets, Google Docs, Google everything. But it's free, it's simple, it's all interconnected, it's easy to share. It's been great. So yeah, there you go. I love it. Thank you for sharing that. Feels like we're nerding out on this. Okay. Now, one more bonus one. This is a last but definitely not least, and that's, what are you grateful for today, Katie?
My partner has been in Europe for 2 weeks, and he comes home in 2 days, and I am very grateful that he is about to come home.
Aw, yeah, absolutely. Yay, 2 more days. You can do it.
Yes.
Well, I am so grateful to have connected with you, and that you were willing to come here and share your wisdom and your perspective on something that's so important to keep us healthier, to keep us from burnout. Thank you so much, Katie, for shining your light in this world and for sharing it with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me today. Your time is precious and limited, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. If you have feedback, questions, or want to schedule a chat, head to positivelyproductive.com/connect. And if you are looking for any of the resources referenced on the podcast, from books to products to training and more, go to positivelyproductive.com/resources.